you have the resignation of Andrew Cuomo. So Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, has finally decided to resign. Now, this comes amid calls of him to resign for a while now. Remember, in the beginning of the pandemic, he was deemed a hero, but there was a scandal that was starting to come up, not in mainstream news, it was in right-wing news. Now, this was before, if you remember, it was before President Biden was elected to office. It was before all of that took place, when the nursing home scandal started to come out around voting season. Now, my theory is the reason the mainstream media, the only one that I saw covering this was Fox News. All the rest of the media that was covering this was more low-key media, more non-mainstream media, alternative media that was covering this, that was sounding the alarm. Mainstream media, CNN didn't cover this until after. At least I didn't see any articles from CNN covering this until after Joe Biden was elected. And I think that that was strategic to help the Democrats in that election. Now, with that being said, he didn't resign over that report that came out, even though there were some calls for him to resign. But now that this sexual assault scandal has come out, more calls came for him to resign because initially there was no investigation. It was just allegations against him. And that's when you had people in his state start to call on him to resign, but you didn't really have national figures start to call on him to resign until now. And that's because Andrew Cuomo said, well, let's wait until the investigations come out. He said that this was a farce, that this was fake, that this was not real, and that he would be acquitted when the investigations came out. Well, newsflash, the investigations come out and it's like a slamming condemnation against this guy. And the person who led the investigation was the attorney general for New York. So she comes out, I forget her name, but she comes out and she basically, I remember the day when it happened, lays a bombshell on Andrew Cuomo. She doesn't hold any punches back when she's talking about what he did. She talks about how he created a toxic workplace of fear and intimidation. She talks about how he sexually assaulted multiple women and harassed them. So Andrew Cuomo is now was after that in tight robes, but he came out with a response to that. And, Andrew Cuomo said that he was not going to resign. He said that the allegations against him were because the culture had changed from when he grew up until now. He didn't realize that some of the things that he was doing was making women uncomfortable. Now, here's my take on that. That is true to a certain extent. I mean, there's no doubt that from when Andrew Cuomo, this guy, I think he's 64. So that's, 60 plus years ago. That's around like the civil rights era. There's no doubt that cultural norms of the interactions between men and women and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in the eyes of society as a whole have changed. There's no doubt that that's true. But when you actually look at what's being alleged against him, and CNN is reporting on this, and it says that there were numerous allegations of unwanted touching. Now, look at the allegations compared to what he actually addressed in that statement that came out. So it says several women recounted to investigators unwanted touching by Cuomo, according to the report. One of them, a state trooper who served on Cuomo's protective detail, said on one occasion, Cuomo ran his finger down her neck and back while they were in an elevator. On another occasion, he ran his hand from her belly button to her right hip while she was holding the door for him, according to the report. Now, that to me, that pushes the line beyond just this is a cultural thing. That seems very, very beyond what people would consider acceptable, even by those standards a while ago. And as it continues, another accuser, identified as Executive Assistant 1 in the report, told investigators Cuomo grabbed her buttocks during hugs and a photo. The report also detailed an allegation previously reported by the Albany Times Union of an incident at the governor's mansion in which Cuomo allegedly reached under her blouse and grabbed her breasts. A separate accuser referred to in the report as state entity employees said Cuomo put his hand on, tapped, and then grabbed her buttocks while they were at a September 2019 event, according to the report. So this is like beyond just a cultural thing. I mean, this is Andrew Cuomo being very, very aggressive, very, very sexually inappropriate in the workplace. At least these allegations are that they're alleging against him. And the fact that it's multiple women shows even more that they could possibly and probably are, in my opinion, telling the truth. So Andrew Cuomo responds to this, and of course he doesn't address those allegations. Those allegations, according to him, are completely 100% fabricated, made up, and false. But what he does address is the, kind of very cultured interactions that he had with people. And he says that it wasn't just women. He says that it was men. He says that it was gay, it was straight. He says it doesn't matter who it was. That's just how I interacted with people. In response to that, Joe Biden calls on him to resign. People in the New York state legislature call on him to resign. People in Congress call on him to resign. And it starts to look like he's falling apart. He says that he will not resign. But later on, once it became clear that the New York state legislature was going to take up articles of impeachment against him, he resigns. Now, he didn't resign because, and this is like the crazy part to me. Like, this is a terrible governor. This is a governor who, from the very beginning of the pandemic to the end of the pandemic, has been very authoritarian in his approach, has not adequately, in my opinion, balanced personal and individual freedom with the pandemic. He has not balanced those two adequately. Now, in the beginning of the pandemic, we remember that New York City was a hotbed, and there was still very little known about COVID-19. There was very little known about treatments for COVID-19, and people were concerned about the hospitals being overwhelmed. So in the beginning, his response to me was appropriate. But as time went on, more information came out about COVID-19. It became more manageable in the hospital. It became clear that certain demographics, such as older people, were the people who were dying from this thing, and younger, healthier people were not dying from this thing. But his heavy-handed approach continued. His approach of shutting down and keeping New York City completely and totally locked down, where businesses could not operate and people could not earn an income, still continued despite this evidence coming out that showed that this pandemic was actually something that was much different than we thought originally. And then as time continued, vaccines came out. Heavy-handed approach continued, and it turned from people willingly getting the vaccine, and once the vaccines became available to everybody, it became a personal choice of whether or not you decided to get vaccinated. He pushed for businesses in his state to mandate vaccinations, which is a gross violation of the respect between the public sphere and the private sphere. He tried to kind of do this weird merge where the private sphere would have the same agenda, the same goals as the public sphere. And it just continues even now, to where now that the Delta variant has arrived, to treat vaccinated people like they're unvaccinated. So he's been a heavy-handed governor, an authoritarian governor in every sense of the word, and as far as it could possibly get under the United States system and what is legal in the United States to do. He's been very authoritarian. There's been no resignation or resigning because of that. It's been because of this scandal. Now, that's not to downplay this scandal. This is a horrendous case. I mean, we don't want a governor abusing his power and using it in a sexual manner to target women. We don't want that. But it does show that where the selective outrage comes from. I think that there should have been just as much outrage against Governor Cuomo over the nursing home scandal, over the authoritarian, heavy-handed approach that destroyed lives, destroyed businesses, made people poorer, made people lose their jobs, and things of that nature. I think there should have been just as heavy-handed of an approach towards him as there is now. But once the articles of impeachment seemed to be what was going to be the outcome here, he did decide to resign. Now, even crazier, that's coming out, and the Yahoo Finance is reporting this, is people are now expressing outrage at his brother Chris Cuomo. Now, watching Chris Cuomo on TV, sometimes I enjoy him, sometimes I don't. I don't enjoy his politics. Sometimes he's funny. He does the whole hypocritical thing a lot. But people are upset because Chris Cuomo, according to the reports that have come out, has tried to help his brother throughout this situation. I don't think that that is where the rage should be at. I mean, anybody is going to help their brother in these kind of situations, especially if you believe your brother is innocent and your brother's telling you that he's innocent. So I don't agree with outrage over that. I don't agree with outrage over that. Now, when I'm looking at the reporting, it looks like the people in the media are saying, well, whenever you create distrust between you and your audience, they don't just see it as, oh, Chris Cuomo, they see it as the media at large, so you're creating distrust for all of us. And I think that there is some truth to that. But I don't know about resigning over that, because I don't know if anybody else who's in that situation wouldn't help their brother that they think is innocent. So I don't know about that. To cover his brother in the first place. Like, that's my opinion. I don't think a news host should be able to cover their family members that are just in any capacity. If you remember in the beginning, they were doing like rank propaganda with each other on TV. It was funny and all of that stuff with the Q-tip scene. You remember like the big Q-tip where he was making fun of, where Chris was making fun of the size of Andrew's nose. It was funny, but I don't think he should have been allowed to cover his brother. I mean, not in a negative or a positive light. I mean, we don't know your intentions going in, or if you can adequately cover your brother as a journalist. So anyways, that is my position on that thing. I think that that's absolutely great that he's resigning, but I think that it's insane that he didn't resign sooner or wasn't pressed to resign sooner. So the Democrats have basically done this to themselves. I mean, they've put out the standard there that happened throughout the Trump administration, that every single allegation of sexual assault not only must be taken seriously, because that's a great precedent, but it must be believed. It must be believed. And whoever's complicit in that, they must be targeted as well. So Chris Cuomo is, facing some backlash. Now, I don't think Chris Cuomo is going to end up resigning. I don't think CNN is going to pressure him to resign. The money's too good. The money's too good from Chris Cuomo. But we'll see what happens. We'll keep watching that. What's insane to me is that this entire pandemic, throughout this entire time, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, and the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, have been smeared, maligned, hit-pieced, attacked viciously. And the governor of New York and California have been celebrated and loved and cheered on by the media. But at the end of everything, Ron DeSantis is still in Florida. Greg Abbott is still in Texas. There's no signs, as far as I'm aware, that their support is waning or that they're in trouble, in some kind of imminent trouble next election cycle. But the governor of New York has resigned, and he resigned in the face of crazy scandals. And the governor of California is facing a recall election. The media is just, I don't think there's any hope for them, honestly. I don't. I think they live in this bubble. I think their reporting is very smug, very irrelevant. It doesn't cover real news in a lot of cases. I think the anchors are just unbearable to watch for long periods of time. They don't have any, the news media doesn't have any depth about any of its coverage. It's all censorious reporting, a bunch of shouting and screaming. Their coverage of elections and the questions that they ask people, it's just bad. And that's why I'm a fan of alternative media.